Footsteps in the attic. I rented this house when I was 27 years old. It sat on the edge of a small town, about a 10-minute drive from the center. I didn't have much money, so I picked a place that was cheap, quiet, and just enough for me to have some space of my own after long shifts at work. The house was an old single story with a pitched roof and a small attic above. From the first time I toured it, I noticed the attic door at the end of the hallway. It was wooden, the paint peeling, the lock rusted. The landlord, an older man in his 60s, simply smiled when I asked about it. "Don't worry about that space," he said. "Just dusty old storage. You won't need to go up there." I didn't think much of it. Everyone has a storage room or two. I signed the lease and moved in right away. During the first few days, everything felt normal. I worked late shifts, usually got home around 11 at night, ate something quick, and collapsed into bed. In the daytime, the house looked harmless. Sunlight spilled through the big front windows. The living room was warm and bright. But at night, the silence pressed down heavy, especially in the hallway that led straight to the attic door. The first night I heard it was a Tuesday. I had just turned off the light and pulled the blanket over me when a sound came from above. At first, it was faint a creak. Old houses creak, I told myself. But then it came again, louder, and then again. It wasn't the random groan of wood in the wind. It was footsteps, slow, heavy, pacing right across the ceiling of my bedroom. I remember sitting bolt upright, my heart pounding. I held my breath and listened. Silence stretched for a few seconds. And then, another step, drawn out, deliberate. Someone or something was walking up there. I scrambled out of bed, turned on every light in the house, and grabbed a broom like a weapon. Standing under the attic door, I stared up. It was shut tight, the lock still in place. I tried to laugh at myself, convincing my nerves it had to be mice, maybe a raccoon trapped in the rafters. I forced myself to go back to bed, though it was impossible to sleep peacefully again that night. But the footsteps came back, every night, always around 2 in the morning. Never fast, never frantic, just steady, dragging steps, as if someone was pacing the attic slowly, deliberately. I started losing sleep. My nerves frayed. My hands shook during the day, and I even considered breaking the lease. But I'd already paid 3 months in advance, and I couldn't bear the thought of telling people I'd run away just because I was scared of noises. A week later, I made up my mind. I was going to check the attic. I bought a folding ladder from the hardware store and set it beneath the attic door. That night, sure enough, at 2 a.m., the footsteps started again. My chest hammered as I unfolded the ladder, placed my hand on the handle, and turned it. The lock gave way far too easily. The door creaked open, and a blast of cold, stale air rushed down over me. I aimed my flashlight into the darkness. Dust floated in the beam, thick and undisturbed. The smell was damp, sour, suffocating. And there across the attic floor I saw faint footprints pressed into the dust, leading toward the farthest corner. I climbed a step, then another. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I followed the trail. And right when I raised the beam higher, the light flickered once, then went out completely. Fresh batteries. Brand new. Dead. I froze. Darkness swallowed me whole. That's when I heard it. A whisper. Right behind my ear. Close enough that I felt the breath. The voice was cold. Gentle, but commanding. I panicked. I jumped down the ladder so fast I scraped my shoulder on the wall. Slamming the attic door shut, I jammed the lock and ran to my bedroom, barricading myself inside. I didn't sleep a second. I just sat there gripping a kitchen knife, waiting for the morning light. The next day I called the landlord, demanded to know what was in that attic. He sighed heavily. "I told you not to go up there," he said flatly. "The last tenant, he heard things too, but nothing ever harmed him. Just keep it shut and don't bother with it. You'll be fine." And then he hung up. Fine? How could I be fine? From that night on, I never opened the attic again. But the footsteps never stopped. Every night, 2 a.m., without fail. Sometimes they grew faster, heavier, like whatever was up there knew I was listening. One night, I heard something drag across the floor, like a body being pulled. 2 months of this wore me down to the bone. I tried to believe it was just stress, some hallucination from lack of sleep. But then came the worst night. I woke suddenly, not from noise, but from a presence. The kind of feeling where every hair on your body stands on end because you know someone is in the room with you. I turned my head toward the door. At the end of the hallway, The attic door was standing wide open, and in the blackness behind it, a figure stood hunched, tall and skeletal, its head tilted. Its face was lost in shadow. I shot upright, fumbled for the lamp. Light flooded the hall empty. The attic door was shut once more. That was it. I packed my bags that same night. At dawn, I dropped the keys through the landlord's mail slot and never went back. But here's the thing. Even now, months later, sometimes I jolt awake at exactly 2 a.m., and in the stillness of my new apartment, I swear I hear them again, those slow, dragging footsteps above me. And somewhere in the silence, a voice whispers, just like it did that night. The woman in the mirror. Back in college, I lived in one of the older dorm buildings on campus. It had been standing for decades, maybe since the 70s, and it looked the part. The paint was peeling in the hallways, the radiators hissed all winter, and the bathrooms smelled faintly of mildew, no matter how much the janitors scrubbed. Still, rent was cheap, and it was close to my classes. My room was small, just big enough for a bed, a desk, and a closet, but I didn't mind. The only thing I never got used to was the communal bathroom down the hall. There were 4 showers, 3 stalls, and a long row of sinks lined with a single massive mirror stretching across the wall. The mirror was old. The silver backing had begun to bubble in spots, leaving black speckles that seemed to stare back at you while you brushed your teeth. At night, when the fluorescent lights buzzed and the building went quiet, that mirror had a way of making the entire bathroom feel wrong. The first time I saw her, it was a Wednesday night. I'd stayed up late, cramming for a midterm, and finally dragged myself to the bathroom around 1 a.m. to brush my teeth. The hallway was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, and when I pushed open the bathroom door, the fluorescent light flickered once before stabilizing. I was alone, or so I thought. I stood at the sink, half asleep, brushing my teeth. When I glanced up at the mirror, I froze. Behind me, reflected in the glass, was a woman. She was standing several feet back, near the stalls. Her hair was long, black, and stringy, hanging in front of her face. She wore what looked like an old white dress, stained gray near the bottom. My heart slammed against my ribs. I spun around instantly. The bathroom was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, she was gone. Just me, pale and wide-eyed, toothbrush dangling from my mouth. I tried to laugh it off. Lack of sleep. Stress. Maybe I had just imagined a shape in the reflection. But it didn't feel imagined. It felt real. Too real. The next night, I avoided the bathroom until I couldn't anymore. I held it in for hours, but eventually, sometime past midnight, I forced myself down the hallway. The air felt colder the closer I got, and when I opened the bathroom door, the fluorescent light was out completely. Only the dim glow from the hall spilled in. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my own reflection, daring myself not to blink. My pulse hammered in my ears. After a full minute of nothing, I exhaled and bent down to turn on the faucet. That's when I saw it again. The faintest movement behind me. I lifted my head slowly. There she was. Closer this time. Her face wasn't hidden anymore. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her features were distorted, like a photograph smudged by water. Her eyes were dark, hollow sockets, and yet I could feel them staring directly into me. Her mouth twitched, pulling up into a grin that didn't belong on a human face. I stumbled backward, knocking into the stall door. My body turned instinctively to face the room, but the space behind me was empty again. The stalls were open. The showers were still. Nothing but silence. When I faced the mirror again, she was gone. I left the bathroom light on that night and slept with my desk lamp glowing until morning. I didn't tell anyone at first. Who would believe me? A ghost in the dorm bathroom? But a few nights later, while eating in the dining hall, I overheard 2 girls from my floor whispering. One of them, pale and jittery, said she didn't like going to the bathroom at night anymore. She swore she'd seen a woman standing behind her in the mirror, smiling. That's when I knew it wasn't just me. Over the next few weeks, stories started to spread quietly. People claimed to see her in the mirror at odd hours, usually late at night when the bathroom was empty. Some said she just stood still, watching. Others swore she smiled, or moved closer when they looked away. One girl broke down crying after she woke up in the middle of the night and found the woman's reflection in her dorm room window, even though nobody was outside. The dorm staff brushed it off as rumors, stress, or sleep deprivation. Final season always made people a little crazy, they said. But I knew better. One night, determined to prove something to myself, I brought my phone to record. I set it up on the sink, angled at the mirror, and hit record before leaning down to wash my face. When I glanced back at the screen a few seconds later, I froze. On the playback, right behind me, a woman was standing. The camera caught her perfectly long black hair, the white dress, her gray face twisted into that same impossible grin. But when I spun around in the moment, the room was empty. And when I looked back at my phone, the recording had corrupted. Just static, as if nothing had been there at all. I deleted it immediately. I couldn't bear to see even the static again. I started using a different bathroom on another floor, even if it meant creeping down extra flights of stairs every night. Anything to avoid that mirror. But sometimes, late at night, when I wash up in my own dorm room, I catch glimpses. Not always. Just fleeting moments in the corner of my eye, in the reflection of my desk monitor or my window at night. Long black hair, a pale face. And sometimes, when the dorm is silent and I'm half asleep, I hear it. A faint laugh, muffled but sharp, then a whisper, echoing in my ears even though no one is there. Room 6. I was on a business trip 2 years ago when this happened. I had driven almost 5 hours straight, and by the time I pulled into town, I was too exhausted to keep going. The company had booked me into a budget roadside inn, the kind of place you pick for convenience, not comfort. The building was old, 2 stories, with faded carpet in the lobby and a faint smell of cigarettes clinging to the walls. The receptionist, a tired woman in her 40s, barely looked up when I checked in. She slid me the key and said, "Room 6, down the hall, first floor." I dragged my suitcase along the hallway, passing closed doors with numbers nailed crookedly above them. My room was at the very end. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and the smell of musty fabric hit me. The room was small, with a single bed, a dresser, and a standing wardrobe shoved into the corner. It wasn't much, but I didn't care. All I wanted was a hot shower and some sleep. I unpacked a few things, hung up my suit jacket, and showered quickly. By the time I collapsed onto the bed, it was close to midnight. I turned out the light, let the hum of the air conditioner fill the silence, and closed my eyes. That's when I heard it. 3 sharp knocks on my door. I jolted upright, my pulse hammering. I waited, listening. The hallway outside was silent. I thought maybe it was another guest at the wrong room, but when I looked through the peephole, no one was there. I chalked it up to kids playing around, or maybe even my imagination. I locked the door tighter and climbed back into bed. 10 minutes later, the knocks came again. This time louder, faster. I leapt out of bed and swung open the door immediately, ready to confront whoever was screwing with me. But the hallway was empty. Cold air rushed past me, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I closed the door again, unsettled, and sat on the edge of the bed. I tried to distract myself with my phone, scrolling aimlessly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The air in the room felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. Then came the third set of knocks. Not from the hallway this time. From inside the wardrobe. The sound froze me solid. 3 dull thuds, as if someone had rapped their knuckles against the wooden door from the inside. I forced myself to move, to cross the room. My hand hovered over the wardrobe handle. My heart thudded in my throat. I yanked the door open. Nothing. Just an empty space with my suit jacket hanging limply, swaying slightly as if stirred by a breeze that didn't exist. I slammed it shut, shoved the desk chair in front of it, and tried to convince myself it was just the old wood expanding or something equally rational. But deep down, I knew better. I didn't sleep much that night. I dozed off eventually, only to jolt awake at 3 a.m. to a scraping sound. I turned my head slowly. The wardrobe door was moving. Despite the chair jammed against it, it creaked open an inch, then another. The air conditioner was off. There was no draft, yet the door was opening anyway. I scrambled up, heart in my throat, watching as the gap widened. In the sliver of darkness inside, I swear I saw movement, a shape shifting, something pale retreating into the shadows. I bolted. I grabbed my suitcase and ran straight out the door in my pajamas. I didn't care about my clothes, my charger, nothing. I went right back to the lobby and slammed the key on the counter. The receptionist looked at me with tired eyes. "Problem with the room?" "Yes," I gasped out of breath. "There's something in the wardrobe. Something knocking. Moving." Her face didn't change. No surprise, no concern. She just sighed and said, "Room 6 again." Again. That word chilled me more than anything else. She offered me another room, but I refused. I got in my car and drove until I found a different hotel an hour away. I barely slept, but at least nothing knocked on my door. The next day, out of curiosity, or maybe stubbornness, I Googled the inn. I didn't find much, just a handful of vague reviews complaining about strange noises and uncomfortable vibes in room 6 specifically. One even mentioned knocking sounds at night that wouldn't stop. Nobody elaborated. Nobody explained. I don't know what's in that wardrobe, or what else guests have seen, but I'll never forget the sound of those knocks from inside. And sometimes, late at night when I'm traveling for work, staying in another anonymous hotel room, I still hear echoes of them in my dreams. 3 knocks. Always 3. From the dark. The rocking chair. When my grandmother passed away, the family decided to leave most of her belongings in the house for a while. It was too painful to sort through everything right away. My grandfather, who was still living there, refused to throw anything out. He said the house felt empty enough without removing her things. Among the items left behind was her old wooden rocking chair. It was heavy, dark oak, and had been in the family for decades. I remember being a little kid and sitting on her lap while she rocked me to sleep in that chair. The steady creak of the wood and the gentle motion always calmed me. After she was gone, the chair stayed exactly where it always had been in the corner of the living room, facing the fireplace. It became more of a decorative piece than anything. My grandfather never used it, but he refused to move it. "That's her chair," he said simply. A few months later, I spent a weekend at my grandfather's house to keep him company. He was still adjusting to living alone, and I didn't want him to feel isolated. The first night I was there, after dinner, we watched TV in the living room. The rocking chair sat in its corner, empty, unmoving. When I went to bed, I couldn't sleep right away. The old house creaked and shifted in the night, and I lay awake listening to every little noise. Then I heard something distinct. Creak, pause, creak. It was a rhythmic sound. Slow, measured. The sound of wood moving back and forth. I sat up, straining my ears. It was coming from the living room, the rocking chair. I told myself it was my imagination, or maybe a draft from one of the windows, though they'd all been shut. I eventually forced myself to lie back down, telling myself I'd dreamed it. But the next morning, when I mentioned it casually over breakfast, my grandfather just smiled faintly. "She's always rocked that chair," he said. Even now. I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking or being sentimental. But the way he looked at me, serious and calm, made me question if he believed it. The second night, I decided to test it. I stayed up late in the living room, sitting on the couch with the TV volume low. My grandfather had gone to bed hours earlier. Midnight came and went, and I was almost ready to give up when I heard it again. Creak. The chair moved. I froze, staring across the room. The rocking chair swayed forward slowly, then back, as though someone invisible was sitting in it. I whispered, "Grandma?" The chair rocked again, a little faster this time, the sound of the old wood filling the silent room. I wanted to run upstairs, but my legs wouldn't move. I was glued to the spot, terrified and yet unable to look away. Then, as suddenly as it started, the chair slowed and stopped. I spent the rest of the night lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe the floorboards had shifted, or maybe I was overtired. But deep down, I knew it wasn't the house. Something had been in that chair. The following evening, my grandfather joined me in the living room again. As we watched TV, I glanced nervously at the rocking chair. It was still, silent. My grandfather noticed my glance and chuckled softly. "She likes company," he said. I swallowed hard. "Grandpa, do you see her?" He didn't answer directly. He just said, "Sometimes, when the nights are long, I hear her voice. She tells me not to be lonely." The way he said it so calmly sent shivers through me. Later that night, I woke around 3 in the morning. At first, I thought it was the sound of the wind, but then I heard it clearly. Creak, creak, creak. I tiptoed out of my room and peered down the staircase into the living room. The chair was moving again. This time, I swear I saw more than just motion. In the dim light spilling through the curtains, I could make out the faint outline of someone sitting there. A figure, hazy and pale, but unmistakable. Shoulders, arms resting on the sides of the chair, long hair cascading down. I clutched the banister, my throat dry. I wanted to call out to my grandfather, but the words stuck in my throat. The chair rocked steadily. The figure remained, faint but solid enough to terrify me. Then, as I stood frozen, I heard a whisper. Soft, gentle, almost affectionate. Go back to bed. It was my grandmother's voice. Every hair on my body stood on end. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over myself, and fled to my room. I shut the door, pressed my back against it, and stayed there until the sun came up. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to mention what I'd seen. My grandfather was cheerful, making breakfast like nothing had happened. When I looked at the chair, it was still again just wood and fabric. But I knew what I had seen. That weekend was the last time I stayed overnight in that house. I visit my grandfather often, but I always leave before dark now. The chair is still there, in its corner, unmoved. Every time I see it, I half expect it to start swaying again, creaking back and forth. And sometimes, late at night in my own home, when the house is quiet and I'm trying to fall asleep, I swear I hear it in my head. Creak, creak, creak. And I hear her voice, faint but clear, as though she's leaning down over me. The eyes at the window. When I was 12 years old, my family lived in a small house on the edge of town. Money was tight, so my parents gave the larger upstairs bedrooms to my older siblings and put me in a small room on the first floor. At the time, I didn't mind. It was my own space, and I liked being closer to the kitchen so I could sneak snacks at night. The only part I didn't like was the window. My room had one window that looked out onto the backyard. During the day, it wasn't so bad. I could see the garden, the old swing set, and the fence at the far end. But at night, when the light was off and the curtains were open, that window was just a black rectangle staring back at me. I tried to convince myself it was no big deal. But deep down, I always felt like something could be out there, watching. The first time it happened, I woke in the middle of the night for no reason. The house was silent. My siblings were asleep upstairs, and my parents' room was at the far end of the hall. I lay there in the dark, trying to drift off again, when I felt the prickling sensation that someone's eyes were on me. I rolled over, facing the window, and I saw them, two glowing red eyes, floating just beyond the glass. At first, I thought I was dreaming. I squeezed my eyes shut, rubbed them, then looked again. The eyes were still there, unblinking, burning faintly in the darkness. I bolted upright and screamed for my mom and dad. By the time they rushed into the room and flipped on the light, the eyes were gone. The yard was empty. They told me it was a nightmare. My dad even went outside with a flashlight, scanning the garden and the fence. Nothing. Not a footprint, not a sound. For a while, I tried to believe them. Kids have nightmares. Maybe my imagination was running wild. But then, it happened again. A week later, almost the same time of night, I woke to the same prickling sensation. My stomach dropped before I even turned toward the window. And sure enough, there they were. Two eyes, glowing faint red, staring at me through the glass. This time, they were closer. I could see the faint outline of a head behind them. Shadowy, tall, impossible to make out. I screamed again. My parents came, frustrated this time, insisting it was a dream. But I knew better. From then on, the eyes came back every few nights. Sometimes nearer, sometimes farther away, but always there, always watching. I started sleeping with the curtains shut, but that didn't help. The sensation of being watched never went away. More than once, I swore I saw the faint red glow leaking around the edges of the curtains. One night, I decided to test myself. I left the curtains open, determined not to scream. I wanted to see how long I could look. Around 2 a.m, I woke. The eyes were there, brighter than ever. I lay frozen, staring back at them. My heart thudded so hard I thought it would burst. The eyes didn't blink. They didn't move. Just fixed on me, unrelenting. After what felt like hours, I finally couldn't take it anymore. I threw the blanket over my head and stayed there until daylight seeped into the room. When I finally looked again, the window was clear, the backyard normal. I told my siblings about it, hoping for some kind of reassurance. Instead, my oldest brother got quiet. Then he admitted that when he was younger, sleeping in the same room before me, he'd seen something at the window too. He said he'd never told anyone because he didn't want to be called crazy. That was the moment I knew it wasn't my imagination. The worst night came a month later. I woke again, the familiar dread crawling over me. The eyes were there, closer than ever, so close I could see the faint fog of condensation forming on the glass with every breath it took. I wanted to scream, but terror clamped down on my throat. Instead, I lay there trembling, eyes locked on the window. And then, slowly, the shadow behind the eyes moved. A hand, pale, long-fingered, pressed flat against the glass. The sound of nails dragging lightly against the window pane scraped through the silence. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I screamed louder than I ever had in my life. My parents burst into the room. My dad yanked the curtains closed before I could say anything, then pulled me into his arms. My mom kept insisting I was dreaming, but I saw the look in my dad's eyes. He'd seen something too. We never talked about it. Not once. I refused to sleep in that room anymore. For weeks, I camped out in my parents' room, until eventually they gave in and let me trade with one of my siblings upstairs. Nobody ever used that room again. We moved out of the house a few years later. The new owners renovated, tore down the old swing set, redid the garden. But sometimes when I drive past it, I glance at that first floor window. I can't help it. And every time, I swear I see the faintest shimmer of red, like a reflection that shouldn't be there. Even now, as an adult, I'll wake in the middle of the night sometimes. I'll lie still in bed, heart pounding, and feel that same sensation I felt as a kid. The sensation of eyes watching me through the dark. And when I finally get the courage to look toward the window, I always half expect to see them waiting. Two red eyes unblinking, watching.